Hello, welcome to Psych with Michelle. So today I'll be talking about setting rejection goals. Yes, you heard that correctly, setting rejection goals. First, I want to note that this topic is actually inspired by an article I read on Vox, and it was titled, "You Should Set Rejection Goals." But before I get into setting rejection goals and what that needs to look like, I first want to talk about the effect that rejection has on us and why we're so sensitive to rejection. So whenever we are faced with rejection, this triggers a response in our amygdala that puts us in a fight or flight mode, and for some people, freeze mode, and essentially can cue hypervigilance, aversion, avoidance, just all the things that you know about fight or flight mode, or freeze too. We forget about that one. But anyway, so from an evolutionary standpoint, as humans, we have evolved to be very sensitive to rejection because in the course of our development, just as a species, if we were faced with rejection, ultimately this could have led to our death, right? So if you think about it, if you're a part of a tribe and let's say you upset the tribe leader, or for instance, I guess they all banded together and rejected you, then ultimately you would be deserted and left to your own devices, right? And that in those days, in those times, right, directly affected your chance of survival and then your ability to essentially generate offspring, right? Carry the genes down, So from an evolutionary standpoint, it makes sense that you and I have evolved to be very averse to rejection. But if we think about it, in our modern world now, facing rejection is actually a key part of succeeding. And so if we think about, all the CEOs and entrepreneurs that we hear from, a lot of them will tell you how they had to face rejection, right? Be it in their own personal lives or in their careers. In some shape or form, the rejection that they received shaped their ultimate success, right? But for the average human, in some ways, it can be hard to actually receive this information and even know what to do with it. So, as stated by the Vox article, setting rejection goals can actually be a way to counteract our sensitivity to rejection. Now, speaking to all you perfectionistic individuals out there, myself included, as well as neurodivergent individuals, we can recognize in some ways that the reason why we're not able to put ourselves out there and know that we're going to face rejection, but kind of stomach it, is because of our increased sensitivity to it, right? So in like a counterintuitive way, by exposing yourself to rejection, you actually reduce the fear that you feel when you are rejected and increase your own ability to go out there and do whatever it is you need to do. Now, if we think about it, a lot of times what can stop people from doing the thing is knowing that there's a possibility of being rejected. But if you own the fact that you probably will get rejected and actually celebrate a rejection, in some ways you are changing the neural link, right, that is established between facing rejection. Now, the article talks specifically about setting SMART goals for this, right? And SMART goals specifically meaning that the goal itself is specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's relevant, and time bound, right? So an excellent example for this, right, that I think a lot of people can resonate with is if you're looking to land yourself a girlfriend, boyfriend, or partner, just generally speaking, sitting on your couch, being locked up in your house and never going outside is not going to set you up for much success this way. Now, does it stop you from experiencing rejection? Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. But does it actually help you achieve your goal of scoring a partner? No, it doesn't. So setting a SMART goal, and that's in this specific scenario situation, would look like a SMART rejection goal, right? Because the key part of it is that we're recognizing, we're sitting here saying we're going to set a goal to be rejected, right? So setting a SMART rejection goal would look like seeking to get turned down at least 5 times in a month, right? Now, I don't know about you all, but even just saying that sent alarm signals off mentally in my brain. I was like, ah! But if we pause to actually think about it, if we put ourselves out there and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to try to get rejected 5 times. You're actually anticipating the worst and then recognizing that there might be an opportunity to be pleasantly surprised, right? And so something that I thought was actually is key to introduce here at this point too, that the article talked about, is going through your rejections and seeing in some ways how you might have contributed to it. And then also what might have been happening for the other person who rejected you, right? So it's balancing like what was my part and then also what was like something that I couldn't really control, right? And this helps us recognize that sometimes rejection isn't even about us, right? That the way that we're internalizing and thinking about it is not always correct. And additionally, something that the article talked about is thinking about maybe in some ways, right, with the rejection that you faced, what's something positive that came out of that rejection? What did it open up for you later down the road that you wouldn't have had an opportunity for had you not been rejected, right? And then lastly, the article also discussed ways that we can kind of recognize that it's not going to be an easy thing to do. And so just like how I said that when I brought up the idea of being rejected, you know, to go out on dates, like sent off alarms in my own head, as I imagine it probably did for you, is the same way that it's probably going to do the same in all these other areas that you might set yourself up for rejection. So the point then is not to feel initially comfortable when you start doing it, but is to recognize that there's going to be a level of discomfort and that it's going to be challenging in the beginning, and yet still it's something that's worth doing, right? I think something that's important to note that maybe the article didn't specifically touch on, but was kind of subliminally brought in, is that doing this with a community or with other people can actually be so helpful and beneficial. So by talking about the rejection you face and hearing about the rejection others have faced, in some ways we can normalize it and recognize that on a day-to-day basis, each and every one of us is probably being rejected if we're actually putting ourselves out there. So to summarize all that I've said, rejection is normal, it's scary, and it's also adaptive, right? But we have to recognize in ways that it might be hindering us. And lastly, to be smart about setting rejection goals, right? And think about the ways that we can actually push ourselves out there to face rejection rather than to avoid it. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you liked all that you heard. If you did, go ahead and click that follow button, subscribe to my videos, and I'll see you the next time that I post. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.